The security camera footage from First National Bank will haunt you forever. A pregnant woman, 8 months along, standing at the counter, begging to buy a crib for her unborn child. Her billionaire husband walks in, $300 million in his bank account, and in front of 20 witnesses, 6 security cameras, and his mistress wearing stolen diamonds, he does the unthinkable. He kicks her. She falls, blood spreads across the marble floor, and he steps over her body like she is garbage. He thought he was untouchable. He thought her father was just a broke gardener eating canned beans in Ohio. He was dead wrong. Second 30 seconds, because that gardener, he was actually the most dangerous man on Wall Street. A ghost who built cages for billionaires and made empires disappear overnight. But here's the twist. The father did not destroy Julian Thorne. His daughter did. This is the story of how a woman who was told she was nothing became the one thing her abuser never expected, his complete destruction. And by the end, you will understand why some people should never be underestimated. Value statement: this story is more than entertainment. It is a blueprint for survival. For anyone who has ever been told they are worthless. For anyone trapped in a relationship where love became a cage. For anyone who lost themselves and forgot how powerful they truly are. The lesson is simple, but life-changing. When someone kicks you, while you are down, you have 2 choices. Stay down, or get up and make them regret ever touching you. Elena Vance got up. And what happened next will remind you that the strongest people are not those who never fall. They are the ones who fall, bleed, and rise anyway. Meaning of the story: this story exists to prove 3 truths. First, wealth does not equal power. Character does. Second, the people who try to break you often hand you the tools to destroy them. And third, your darkest moment is not your ending. It is your beginning. If you have ever felt trapped, voiceless, or invisible, this story is your reminder that you are none of those things. You are a survivor, and survivors always win in the end. The security footage from First National Bank on 5th Avenue, time-stamped October 14th at 10:14 in the morning, would later be called the most expensive piece of video evidence in New York history. It did not show a bank robbery. It showed something far more personal and far more cruel. It showed Julian Thorne, a man worth $300 million, delivering a physical blow to his pregnant wife. He thought no one could touch him. He thought her father was just a broke retired gardener living in a trailer park in Ohio. But Julian made a fatal miscalculation. He did not know that the gardener was actually the man who taught Wall Street how to destroy giants. And by the time the revenge started, it was not just Julian's money that was gone. It was his entire existence. This is the story of how a single kick cost a billionaire everything. But more importantly, this is the story of the woman who got back up. 4 years before that day in the bank, Elena Vance was a rising star. She stood in a Manhattan courtroom, her voice steady and confident as she delivered her closing argument. The opposing counsel, a man twice her age, with 3 times her experience, watched her with grudging respect. When the verdict came back in her favor, her colleagues at the law firm erupted in applause. At 32, Elena had everything she had worked for. A corner office, a growing reputation, a small apartment in Brooklyn that was entirely hers. She paid her own bills, made her own decisions, and answered to no one. That was the woman Julian Thorne identified as his target. They met at a charity gala in the Hamptons. Elena was there, representing a client. Julian was there because he owned half the venue. He was tall, polished, and devastatingly charming. Unlike other wealthy men who talked endlessly about themselves, Julian asked questions. He wanted to know about her cases, her dreams, her childhood in Ohio. The next morning, 100 roses arrived at her office with a card that read, "For the woman who made me forget my own name." Looking back years later, Elena would recognize every red flag she had painted green, the intensity that felt like passion, the speed that felt like certainty, the tears he shed telling her about his difficult childhood, which made her feel special for being trusted with his vulnerability. He proposed after 8 months. "I have never felt worthy of anyone until you," he said, his voice breaking with emotion. "You make me want to be a better man." Her mother, Grace, already sick with the cancer that would take her life the following year, offered a warning that Elena did not fully understand at the time. "Baby," her mother said, holding Elena's hand in the hospital room, "when a man moves too fast, it is not because he loves you. It is because he is afraid you will see him clearly if he slows down." Elena dismissed the concern. Her mother did not know Julian the way she did. She did not see his kindness, his generosity, his devotion. She married him 3 months later. The erosion began so gradually that Elena did not notice it happening. Year one was subtle. Julian convinced her to leave her job at the law firm. "You work so hard," he said, stroking her hair. "Let me take care of you. You deserve to be pampered." When she hesitated, he added, "Besides, I want you home when I get there. Is that selfish of me?" It felt like love. It felt like being chosen. Year two brought isolation. Her friends from law school stopped calling because Elena kept canceling plans. Julian always had something more important scheduled. "Your friends do not understand our lifestyle," he explained. "They are jealous of what we have. It is better if you spend time with people who appreciate you." One by one, the connections that had defined her life disappeared. Year three completed the cage. Julian took over all financial matters. "I manage money for a living," he laughed when she asked about their accounts. "Do you really think you could do it better? Just ask me when you need something. I will take care of everything." The woman who had once argued cases before judges now argued with her husband about whether she could buy groceries without permission. Elena found herself organizing her closet one afternoon, and her hand brushed against something buried in the back. Her law school diploma. She pulled it out and stared at it, touching the embossed letters like a relic from another life. She used to be somebody. She used to matter. Now she was furniture in Julian's penthouse, expected to be beautiful and silent and grateful. The pregnancy should have been a joy. Instead, it became another tool of control. Julian monitored her diet, her exercise, her doctor appointments. He chose the hospital, the obstetrician, the color of the nursery. When Elena suggested names for the baby, he dismissed each one. "I will decide the name," he said. "He is my son." By the 8th month, Elena had stopped suggesting anything at all. On the morning of October 14th, she woke up in the penthouse alone. Julian had not come home the night before. The nursery down the hall was still empty because Julian kept forgetting to transfer money for the crib, the changing table, the basics every baby needed. She found a note on the kitchen counter. "Meeting with investors. Do not wait up." Elena looked around the penthouse. $12 million of real estate, and she could not afford to buy her baby a place to sleep. She had no access to money, no friends to call, no job to return to. She was 8 months pregnant and completely dependent on a man who treated her like an inconvenience. Her mother's voice echoed in her memory. "When a man moves too fast, it is because he is afraid you will see him clearly." Elena saw him clearly now, but it was too late, or so she thought. She did not know that by the end of this day, everything would change. She did not know that the humiliation waiting for her at the bank would be the last one she would ever accept. And she certainly did not know that her father, the quiet gardener she visited twice a year in Ohio, was about to wage a war that would shake Wall Street to its foundations. Elena Vance was about to fall. But for the first time in years, she was also about to get back up. The marble floors of First National Bank echoed with the sounds of expensive shoes and hushed conversations about investment portfolios. Elena stood at the counter, her hands trembling as they rested on her swollen belly. At 32 weeks pregnant, she looked exhausted. Her coat was worn, a relic from 3 years ago, before she had married Julian Thorne. Her blonde hair, usually kept neat, was frizzy from the humidity. "Please," she whispered to the teller, "just check it again. There has to be a mistake." Sarah Mitchell, the young woman behind the counter, looked at her screen with genuine pity. Her nameplate gleamed under the fluorescent lights. "Mrs. Thorne, I am truly sorry," Sarah said softly. The notification on the screen is specific. Access denied. Spousal authorization revoked. The joint account has been frozen by the primary holder. Elena felt the baby kick, as if sensing her distress. "But I need to buy the crib today. The delivery is scheduled. I do not have cash. I do not have anything." "I cannot override Mr. Thorne's security protocols," Sarah replied. Her eyes conveyed what her words could not. "I am so sorry this is happening to you." The heavy oak doors of the bank swung open. The atmosphere shifted instantly, the way air pressure drops before a hurricane. Julian Thorne walked in. He was the picture of modern American royalty. A bespoke navy suit that cost more than most people's cars, a watch that cost more than most people's houses, and an air of arrogance that sucked the oxygen out of the room. He was not alone. Clinging to his arm was a woman in her late 20s with perfect makeup and a predatory smile. Sophia Reynolds, his executive assistant. She wore a diamond tennis bracelet that Elena recognized immediately. It was the one Julian had claimed was lost during their honeymoon in the Maldives. "Julian?" Elena gasped, turning around. Her voice cracked. The baby kicked again, harder this time. "Julian, the card is not working. I am trying to pay for the nursery setup. I just need—" Julian stopped walking. He looked at his wife, not with love or even annoyance, but with the cold detachment one might have for a stain on a rug. He pulled his arm free from Sophia and stepped closer to Elena. The lobby fell deadly silent. Customers froze. Bank employees stopped typing. A security guard's hand drifted toward his radio. 20 pairs of eyes watched the scene unfold. "The card is not working," Julian said, his voice smooth and loud enough for the back of the room to hear. "Because I turned it off. I am tired of seeing my money wasted on junk." "Junk?" Elena's voice cracked further. "It is for your son. It is a crib, Julian. A changing table. I have nothing. You cut off the grocery allowance last week. I am hungry. The baby is hungry." Sophia giggled, covering her mouth with a manicured hand. "Oh, Julian," she purred. "She is playing the victim card again. It is so pedestrian." Julian smirked at his mistress, then turned his cold blue eyes back to his pregnant wife. "You have a roof over your head, do you not? You have the clothes on your back. If you want money, maybe you should ask that loser father of yours." He paused for effect, his lip curling. "Oh, wait. That is right. He is living off canned beans in a trailer park in Ohio." Something ignited in Elena's chest, a spark she had not felt in years. "Do not bring my father into this. He is a good man, better than you will ever be." That was the trigger. Julian Thorne did not like to be challenged. His face darkened. He took a menacing step forward, invading her personal space, close enough that she could smell his cologne and the alcohol on his breath from the night before. "You are nothing without me," Julian hissed, his voice low and venomous. "You were a waitress when I found you. You will be a beggar when I am done with you." The lie hit Elena like a slap. She had never been a waitress. She had been a lawyer, a good one. But Julian had rewritten her history so many times that sometimes even she forgot what was true. "Then divorce me," Elena screamed. The stress of 3 years finally broke through. "Just let me go. You can have everything. I do not care anymore. Just let me go." Julian laughed. It was a cruel, barking sound that echoed off the marble walls. "Never." He leaned closer. "You are my property. You leave when I say you leave, and I say never." Elena could not breathe. The walls were closing in. She needed air. She needed to escape this nightmare, even if just for a moment. She tried to push past him toward the door, toward freedom. As she moved, her shoulder accidentally bumped his arm. It was the clumsy movement of a woman carrying extra weight, nothing more. But Julian reacted as if he had been attacked. "Watch it, you cow." And then he did the unthinkable. In the middle of First National Bank, under the high-definition gaze of 6 security cameras and 20 witnesses, Julian Thorne pulled his leg back and kicked his wife. His expensive Italian leather shoe connected with her shin. She screamed as her leg buckled, but it was the shove that followed that sent her crashing backward. Elena fell hard. Her hip slammed into a velvet rope stanchion. Her back hit the marble floor with a sickening crack. She curled instinctively around her belly, around her baby, even as pain exploded through her body. "Oh my God!" Sarah the teller screamed, vaulting over the counter without thinking. The lobby erupted in chaos. A woman gasped. A man shouted for someone to call 911. The security guard rushed forward, but Julian held up his hand with the casual authority of a man who had never been told no. "She tripped," Julian announced loudly, fixing his cufflinks as if nothing had happened. "She is clumsy, hysterical. Look at her. She has been having mental health episodes for months." Elena lay on the cold marble floor, gasping for air. A sharp, searing pain shot through her abdomen. She looked down and saw something that made her heart stop. A dark stain was spreading across her light gray maternity pants. "The baby," she whimpered, reaching for Julian with a shaking hand. "Julian, please. The baby." Julian looked down at her. For 1 second, just one, something flickered across his face. Fear, perhaps. Recognition that he had gone too far. But then he suffocated it. He buried it under pride and arrogance and the absolute certainty that he was untouchable. He turned to the security guard. "Call an ambulance for her and get my lawyer on the phone. I am suing this bank for slip and fall liability due to wet floors." Then Julian Thorne stepped over his wife's prone body, grabbed Sophia's hand, and walked out of the bank. Elena's vision began to blur. The fluorescent lights above her swam and doubled. She heard voices, distant and muffled, people calling her name. The last thing she saw, before losing consciousness, was Sarah Mitchell's face, tears streaming down her cheeks, holding Elena's hand and saying over and over, "Stay with me. Help is coming. Stay with me." The last thing Elena heard was the wail of ambulance sirens, and her final thought, before the darkness took her, was this: "I am completely alone." She was wrong. The private room at Mount Sinai Hospital was quiet except for the rhythmic beeping of the fetal heart monitor. It was a sound that Robert Vance clung to like a lifeline. He sat in the uncomfortable plastic chair in the corner, exactly as Julian would have expected him to look. A faded flannel shirt, jeans washed too many times, work boots carrying the dust of a garden in Ohio. His hands were calloused, the nails short and clean. At 65, with thinning gray hair and a face etched with deep lines, he looked like a man who had spent his life laboring for minimum wage. He looked like a nobody. Elena lay in the hospital bed, pale and connected to machines. The doctors had managed to stop the bleeding. The baby, a boy, was stressed but stable. She needed complete bed rest for the remaining weeks. Her eyes fluttered open. Dad. Robert was at her side instantly, his rough hand holding hers gently. I am here, kiddo. I am here. Did Julian come? She asked, her voice raspy. Robert's jaw tightened. A muscle feathered in his cheek. His eyes went flat, in a way that had once made international criminals confess without being asked. No. His lawyer came, dropped off a document. He nodded toward the bedside table. A thick envelope sat there with the logo of Sterling, Cooper, and Thorne. Inside was a non-disclosure agreement, accompanied by a check for $10,000. Hush money disguised as a spousal support advance. Elena began to cry. Quiet tears that rolled down her cheeks and soaked into the hospital pillow. I cannot do this anymore, Dad. He is too powerful. He knows everyone. The judges, the police, the media. He said he would take the baby. He said he would prove I am mentally unstable because I have no money, no job, no proof of anything. Who is going to believe me over him? He said that? Robert asked. His voice was very low. It did not sound like the voice of a gardener. It sounded like gravel grinding against steel. He said you are nothing, Elena sobbed. He said we are ants. The door to the hospital room banged open. Julian Thorne walked in like he owned the building, which, given his donations to the hospital, he practically did. He had 2 large bodyguards with him. He did not look remorseful. He looked annoyed that his schedule had been interrupted. Well, Julian said, looking around the room with distaste. At least the baby is alive. Saves me a PR headache. Robert stood up slowly. He was not a tall man, perhaps 5'9", while Julian towered at 6'2". But something in his posture made Julian's bodyguards shift uncomfortably. Get out, Robert said. Julian laughed. He walked over to the bed, ignoring Robert entirely, and looked down at Elena. Sign the papers. His voice was casual, almost bored. If you tell the police I kicked you, I will bury you in legal fees until you are living in a cardboard box. And I will take the kid. You know I will. He smiled. Who are they going to believe? The hysterical woman with no income, no career, no friends? Or the pillar of the community? Julian turned his gaze to Robert. He looked the older man up and down, sneering at the flannel shirt, the worn boots, the calloused hands. And you? Julian's voice dripped with contempt. The gardener. What are you going to do? Hit me with a shovel? He stepped closer to Robert, close enough to smell. Go back to Ohio, old man. This is the big city. The air is too expensive for you to breathe here. Robert did not blink. He did not shout. He did not clench his fists. He just stared at Julian with eyes that were terrifyingly empty. You hurt my daughter. It was not a question. She fell, Julian lied smoothly. But even if I did, what are you going to do about it? You have nothing. You are nothing. Julian reached into his pocket and pulled out $100 bill. He crumpled it up and tossed it at Robert's chest. It bounced off the flannel and landed on the floor. For your bus fare, home, Julian said. Make sure she signs the NDA by morning, or I cut off the health insurance. Then you can watch your grandson be born in a free clinic, if he survives. Julian turned on his heel and marched out, his bodyguards trailing behind him like obedient dogs. Silence returned to the room. Elena was weeping into her pillow. Robert stooped down. He picked up the $100 bill. He smoothed it out carefully, folding it neatly into a small square. He placed it in his shirt pocket. Dad, I am so sorry, Elena whispered. He is a monster, and I married him. I was so stupid. No, Robert said softly. You were trusting. That is not the same thing. He kissed her forehead. Rest now. I have to make a phone call. Who are you calling? Elena asked. We do not have money for a lawyer. We do not have money for anything. Robert walked to the door. He paused, his hand on the frame. We do not need a lawyer, he said. We need an exterminator. He walked out of the hospital room and down the long, sterile corridor. He took the elevator to the lobby and walked out into the cool New York night. The city lights glittered around him, indifferent to the drama unfolding in one small hospital room. Robert walked 3 blocks away from the prying eyes of hospital cameras until he found a quiet alleyway between 2 buildings. He checked his surroundings with practiced ease, confirming no one was watching. Then he reached into his boot and pulled out a phone. It was not the cracked Android he used to call Elena for their weekly conversations about tomato plants and weather. This was a satellite phone, heavy, encased in black rubber, untraceable. He dialed a number that had not been active in 12 years. It rang once. Authentication, a computerized voice requested. Code black, Robert said. Archangel 790. His accent had changed completely. The rural Ohio twang was gone, replaced by the crisp, sharp diction of a man who had been educated at Oxford and hardened in the trenches of international finance. There was a pause. Then a human voice answered, a voice that sounded stunned. Mr. Vance, my God, we thought you were dead. The agency listed you as retired. Inactive since 2012. I was, Robert said. He stared up at the penthouse lights of the Manhattan skyline where Julian Thorne lived. But I have just been reactivated. What are your orders, sir? Do you need a tactical team? No guns. Robert's voice was cold. Not yet. I want you to open the vault. Access the dead hand protocols. Target, Julian Thorne, Thorne Enterprises. I want to know where every single cent of his money is. I want to know who he sleeps with, who he bribes, and where he hides his skeletons. I want full forensic dismantling of his entire life. Sir, Thorne is a major player. This will cause ripples in the market. I do not care about the ripples, Robert said, his eyes narrowing. I am going to sink the whole ship. He hung up the phone. He looked at the crumpled $100 bill Julian had thrown at him. He took out a lighter and set the bill on fire, watching Benjamin Franklin's face burn until it was ash, floating away in the wind. Julian Thorne thought he had kicked a helpless woman. He did not realize he had just declared war on the former head of the International Financial Crimes Division, a man known in certain classified circles simply as the architect, the man who built the cages for the world's biggest monsters. And the architect was ready to work. But this time, he would not work alone. This time, his daughter would hold the sword. Robert returned to Elena's hospital room an hour later. He was still in his gardener clothes, but something about him had changed. His posture was different. His eyes were sharper. Elena was sitting up in bed, the NDA envelope still unopened on the table beside her. I have resources, Robert said, pulling a chair close to her bed. Money, connections, information. I can destroy Julian Thorne financially within 48 hours. Elena stared at her father. How? You live in a trailer park. That is what I wanted people to believe. Robert's voice was gentle but firm. Before you were born, before I met your mother, I worked for the government. I tracked financial criminals. I dismantled empires, built on fraud, and stolen money. I was good at it. Too good. The work changed me, made me see darkness everywhere. When your mother came into my life, I walked away. I buried that part of myself because I wanted to be a father, not a weapon. And now? Now, Robert said, I can be both. But I need you to understand something. He leaned forward, his eyes locked on hers. I will not do this for you. I will only do this with you. What do you mean? If I destroy Julian and you just watch from the sidelines, you are still a victim. His PR team will spin it as your crazy mercenary father attacking an innocent businessman. You need to be the one holding the sword when he falls. You need to lead this. Elena looked down at her hands. They were trembling. I am not a lawyer anymore, Dad. I have not practiced in 3 years. I do not even know if I remember how. You were top of your class at Columbia Law, Robert said. You won cases against attorneys with 30 years more experience. That person is still inside you. Julian buried her. It is time to dig her out. Elena was silent for a long moment. Then she reached for the NDA envelope. She did not sign it. She tore it in half. Teach me everything, she said. Robert smiled. It was the first real smile he had shown since arriving in New York. First, we need a team. The next morning, Elena made a phone call she had been putting off for 2 years. Meredith Collins answered on the second ring. If this is a telemarketer, I swear I will find you and I will make you regret every life choice that led to this moment. Mary, Elena said. It is Elena. Elena Vance. We went to law school together. There was a pause, then an explosion of sound. Elena? Elena? Where the hell have you been? You disappeared. You stopped returning calls. I thought you were dead, or in witness protection, or married to some rituous jerk who isolated you from everyone who ever cared about you. Elena winced. The third one. Another pause. Then Meredith's voice changed completely. It went from outraged friend to focused professional in half a second. Tell me everything, Meredith said. And do not leave anything out, Elena told her. The love bombing, the isolation, the financial control, the kick in the bank, the NDA, the threats about the baby. When she finished, Meredith was quiet for 10 full seconds. I am on my way, Meredith finally said. I am bringing coffee and my nuclear option binder. Do not move. You're what? I have been waiting for a case like this my entire career, Meredith said. There was something fierce in her voice. See you in 2 hours? Meredith Collins burst into the hospital room like a force of nature. She was tall, with auburn hair pulled back in a severe ponytail, and she carried an enormous leather briefcase, stuffed with files. Julian Thorne, she announced, dropping the briefcase on the visitor's chair. That Julian Thorne? I have been waiting for someone to take that man down since he hit on me at a charity dinner and called me sweetheart like I was his secretary. I graduated top of our class. Top. Do you know how insulting that was? Elena almost smiled. It was the first time she had felt like smiling in months. Mary, this is my father, Robert. Meredith shook Robert's hand, sizing him up. Gardener, right? Elena mentioned you grow tomatoes. Among other things, Robert said, mildly. Meredith pulled out a massive binder. The cover read, Divorce. Nuclear option. I have color-coded tabs, Meredith said. Tabs? Elena, this is my Super Bowl. She opened the binder and began flipping through sections. Okay, first thing, documentation. Courts do not care about your feelings. They care about evidence. From now on, everything goes in writing. Every threat, every denial of money, every bruise, photos with timestamps, emails to yourself. Create a paper trail so thick a judge could build a house with it. I have the bank footage, Elena said. 20 witnesses saw him kick me. That is a start. Meredith nodded. But Julian has expensive lawyers. They will claim you fell. They will claim you are unstable. We need more, Robert stepped forward. What if I told you his hedge fund is a Ponzi scheme? Meredith's head snapped toward him. Excuse me? His financial guy, Arthur, is pulling records now. Thorne Enterprises is leveraged to collapse. He is borrowing against client assets to fund his lifestyle. The penthouse, the yacht, the diamonds. Robert's voice was calm, factual. If the market dips 2%, he is insolvent. Meredith stared at him for a long moment. Then she turned to Elena. I like your dad, she said. He can stay. Over the next 3 days, the team assembled. Arthur Pendleton arrived with his tablet and his forensic accounting skills. He was a thin man with sharp glasses and sharper eyes who spoke in numbers and percentages. Detective Angela Cross from the NYPD Domestic Violence Unit came by to take Elena's statement. She was a survivor herself, and she believed Elena when no one else in law enforcement would. And slowly, carefully, they built a case. On the fourth day, Elena filed for emergency divorce, citing domestic violence. The bank footage was submitted to police. A sympathetic judge, Patricia Hamilton, granted Elena temporary custody and froze Julian's accounts, pending investigation. Meredith walked into Elena's room with champagne that she immediately put away when she remembered Elena was pregnant. We did it, Meredith said. The preliminary injunction went through. His accounts are frozen. The police are opening an investigation. He is done. Elena allowed herself to feel something she had not felt in years. Hope. She touched her belly, feeling the baby kick. We are going to be okay, she whispered. We are going to be okay. She was wrong. 72 hours after their victory, everything collapsed. Elena was still in the hospital when Meredith came running in, her face pale. We have a problem, Meredith said. A big one. She turned on the television, mounted on the wall. A news anchor was speaking over footage of Julian Thorne standing outside a courthouse, looking somber and victimized. Breaking news tonight, the anchor said. Billionaire Julian Thorne's attorneys have filed explosive counterclaims against his estranged wife, Elena Vance. Documents submitted to the court allege that Mrs. Thorne, formerly Mrs. Vance, has a history of mental illness and fabricated the assault allegations. Elena watched in horror as the screen showed what appeared to be medical records. These psychiatric evaluations, the anchor continued, provided by Mr. Thorne's legal team, paint a troubling picture of a woman struggling with delusional episodes and paranoid behavior. Mr. Thorne's attorney, Harrison Sterling, released a statement expressing concern for the safety of the couple's unborn child. The television cut to Harrison Sterling, a silver-haired man with the practiced sincerity of a snake. My client is a loving husband, Sterling said into the cameras, who has tried for years to help his wife with her mental health challenges. The so-called assault was actually Mr. Thorne attempting to steady his wife when she became hysterical and lost her balance. We have full confidence that the courts will see through this malicious attack on an innocent man. Elena could not breathe. Those records are fake. I have never been to a psychiatrist. I have never had a mental health evaluation. He manufactured them. It gets worse, Meredith said grimly. She changed the channel. Another news program, this time showing Judge William Crawford, a different judge than Patricia Hamilton. In a surprising reversal, Judge Crawford has overturned the custody order issued earlier this week. Citing new evidence regarding Mrs. Thorne's mental fitness, the judge has ruled that the account freeze was premature and that Mr. Thorne's parental rights must be protected. Elena felt the room spin. He bought a judge. He literally bought a judge. Robert stepped forward, his phone in his hand. Arthur just confirmed. William Crawford received a wire transfer of $500,000 to an offshore account 3 days ago. Untraceable unless you know where to look. Can we prove it? Meredith demanded. Not in time, Robert said. The legal system moves slowly. Julian knows that. He is using the time against us. The television droned on. A body language expert was now analyzing the bank footage. Notice how Mrs. Thorne moves erratically, the expert said, pointing at the screen. This could indicate a manic episode. If you watch carefully, Mr. Thorne appears to be reaching out to steady her when she falls. This is consistent with someone trying to help, not harm. Elena stared at the screen. They were rewriting reality. They were taking the worst moment of her life and turning it into evidence of her own insanity. I was kicked, she said, her voice breaking. Everyone saw it. 20 people watched him kick me. 20 people who are now being contacted by Julian's lawyers, Meredith said quietly, being offered money, being reminded of how powerful he is, being asked if they really saw what they thought they saw. Robert muted the television. He knelt beside Elena's bed. Listen to me, he said firmly. This is what men like Julian do. They do not just attack you. They attack reality itself. They make you question what you saw, what you felt, what you know to be true. But you are not crazy, Elena. You know what happened, and we are going to prove it. How? Elena whispered. He has judges. He has media. He has unlimited money. How do we fight that? Robert was quiet for a moment. Then he said something that would change everything. We do not fight his strengths. We exploit his weakness. What weakness? He is untouchable. No one is untouchable, Robert said. And Julian's weakness is obvious. It is his ego. He needs to be the smartest person in every room. He needs to win every battle. So we let him think he is winning. We let him get comfortable, and then we destroy him from the inside. Elena looked at her father, really looked at him. She saw something in his eyes that she had never noticed before. A cold, calculating intelligence that had nothing to do with gardening. You have done this before, she said. Taken down people like him. Robert nodded slowly. More times than I can count. Elena felt something shift inside her. The despair began to harden into something else. Something that felt almost like determination. Then teach me, she said. Teach me how to fight like you do. Robert smiled grimly. First lesson? The best revenge is not about destroying your enemy. It is about making them destroy themselves. Elena was released from the hospital a week later with strict orders for bed rest. Robert had rented a small apartment in Brooklyn, far from the penthouse she had shared with Julian, far from the world that was calling her crazy. She sat at the kitchen table, legal pads spread out in front of her, while Meredith and Robert strategized. Julian expects us to fight his countersuit head on, Elena said. That is what lawyers do. We argue, we file motions. We drag it out for years while he bleeds us dry. Exactly, Robert agreed. So we do not do that, Elena looked up. What do we do instead? We go around him, she said, surprising herself with the clarity of her own thought. We build a case so overwhelming that no amount of money can make it disappear. Not through one judge, but through multiple jurisdictions, criminal and civil, state and federal. We attack from every direction at once. Meredith grinned. Now you sound like the Elena I remember from law school. Over the next 2 weeks, Elena transformed. She was still recovering physically, still pregnant, still technically confined to bed rest. But her mind had never been sharper. She started thinking like the lawyer she used to be. More importantly, she started thinking like her father. If Julian's weakness is his ego, Elena reasoned, then we use it against him. He cannot resist proving he is smarter than everyone. So we give him opportunities to outsmart us. We let him think he is winning while we set traps. She made a list of everything they needed. First, more victims. Julian had not abused only Elena. A man like that left a trail of broken women behind him. Second, Sophia Reynolds. Julian's mistress was the key to his inner circle, and Elena had seen something in Sophia's eyes at the bank. Not triumph. Fear. Third, financial evidence. Arthur was already digging, but they needed documentation that would stand up in federal court. Finding the other women was easier than Elena expected. She hired a private investigator named Marcus Webb, a former FBI agent who owed Robert a favor. Within a week, he had 3 names: Rebecca Hartwell, Diana Morrison, and Caroline Foster, All former employees or associates of Julian, all with stories similar to Elena's. Rebecca had been Julian's assistant 5 years ago. She quit after he cornered her in his office and made it clear that her career advancement depended on services she was not willing to provide. Diana had been an investor who questioned Julian's accounting practices. He responded by destroying her reputation, spreading rumors that cost her career in finance. Carolyn had dated Julian briefly before Elena. She still had a scar on her arm from where he had grabbed her during an argument. None of them had ever reported him. They were all too scared. Elena met with each of them personally, not as a lawyer, but as a fellow survivor. "I know you are afraid," Elena told Rebecca in a quiet coffee shop in Midtown. "I know what he can do, but he is not invincible. We can prove what he did to us. We can make sure he never does it to anyone else." Rebecca was skeptical. "He will destroy us. He destroyed you, and you were his wife. He tried to destroy me," Elena corrected. "He failed, and he is going to keep failing, because he does not know what I know." "What is that?" Elena leaned forward. "I know his hedge fund is a fraud. I know he bought a judge. I know he is one bad quarter away from bankruptcy. And I know that when this is over, Julian Thorne will be in prison. The only question is whether you want to be part of the reason why." Rebecca was silent for a long moment, then she nodded. "Tell me what you need." Sophia Reynolds was a harder target. She was still with Julian, still playing the role of devoted mistress. But Elena had seen something in her eyes at the bank, just before the kick. Not complicity, terror. Elena asked Marcus Webb to dig into Sophia's background. What he found was illuminating. Sophia had a younger sister named Emma, a freshman at NYU. Their parents were dead. Sophia was Emma's sole provider and protector. Julian knew this. He had made it clear to Sophia that her cooperation was expected, not through explicit threats, but through implication, through the way he mentioned Emma's dorm address in casual conversation, through the way he reminded Sophia how dangerous the city could be for a young woman alone. Sophia was not Julian's accomplice. She was his hostage. Elena arranged a meeting at a small restaurant in Brooklyn, far from anywhere Julian's people might see them. Sophia arrived looking terrified, checking over her shoulder every few seconds. "I know what he has on you," Elena said quietly. "Your sister, Emma." Sophia's face went white. "How do you know about Emma?" "Because I have spent 3 years watching Julian control people." Elena reached across the table. "He is using her to keep you in line. If you testify against him, you are afraid he will hurt her." Sophia nodded, tears forming in her eyes. "He said he would ruin her, get her expelled, make sure she never gets a job anywhere. He knows people. He can do it. He can do it." Elena agreed, "if he is free." "But he is not going to be free much longer. Help me take him down, and I will make sure you and Emma are protected. I have resources you do not know about. My father has contacts in federal law enforcement. We can get Emma into witness protection if necessary." "Why would you help me?" Sophia asked. "I have been horrible to you. I helped him humiliate you." "Because you are not my enemy," Elena said. "Julian is, and I need you. You have seen things. You know where he keeps his records, who he meets with, what he does when he thinks no one is watching. You are the only person who can give me a window into his operation." Sophia wiped her eyes. "If I do this, and he finds out before you take him down, he will kill me. Not figuratively, actually kill me. Then we make sure he does not find out until it is too late." Sophia stared at Elena for a long moment. She saw something in the other woman's eyes: determination, certainty, the quiet confidence of someone who is no longer afraid. "Okay," Sophia whispered. "I am in." 2 months later, Elena went into labor. She delivered a healthy baby boy at Mount Sinai Hospital, 7 pounds, 2 ounces. She named him Leo, after her grandfather, a decision she made entirely on her own. Julian was not present for the birth. He had been barred from the hospital by a restraining order that Meredith had successfully obtained after submitting evidence of the forged psychiatric records. For 3 days, Elena held her son in the recovery room, surrounded by Meredith, Robert, and the small team they had assembled. It felt like peace, it felt like victory. Then the second trap sprung. Elena had deliberately leaked false information suggesting she was planning to flee the country with Leo. Julian, predictably, rushed to file an emergency custody motion. At the hearing, Elena's team was ready. Meredith stood before Judge Patricia Hamilton, the original judge who had been removed from the case by Julian's manipulation. "Your Honor," Meredith said, "we have evidence that the psychiatric records submitted by Mr. Thorne's legal team are fraudulent. The therapist who allegedly conducted the evaluations does not exist. The signature on the documents was forged. We also have bank records showing that Judge William Crawford received a $500,000 payment immediately before he overturned Your Honor's original ruling." The courtroom erupted. Julian's lawyer, Harrison Sterling, objected loudly. Judge Hamilton called for order. "Furthermore," Meredith continued, "we have testimony from 3 women who will swear under oath that Mr. Thorne has a documented pattern of abuse and coercion. And we have forensic accounting evidence that Thorne Enterprises is engaged in securities fraud on a massive scale." Judge Hamilton reviewed the evidence. Her face grew grimmer with each page. "Mr. Sterling," she said finally, "your client has some explaining to do. I am reinstating the custody order and freezing Mr. Thorne's accounts pending a full investigation by the SEC and the FBI." Julian, who had been sitting in the gallery with his customary smug expression, went pale. "This is outrageous," he sputtered. "This is a witch hunt. My lawyers will have your job for this." Judge Hamilton looked at him coldly. "Mr. Thorne, I suggest you stop talking before you make your situation worse." Elena walked out of the courthouse into a swarm of reporters. The story had leaked. Julian Thorne, beloved billionaire, was under federal investigation. "Mrs. Vance," a reporter shouted, "how does it feel to see your husband facing charges?" Elena looked directly into the camera. "My name is Elena Vance, not Mrs. Thorne. And this is just the beginning. For 1 week, it felt like they had won. Julian's accounts were frozen. The SEC opened a formal investigation. The other women came forward publicly, their stories dominating the news cycle. Public opinion shifted dramatically against Julian. Then Julian counterattacked. The leaked college video appeared first. Someone had dug up footage of Elena at a sorority party, drunk, making an offensive joke. Julian's PR team edited it, took it out of context, made her look racist and unstable. The hashtag Elena Vance. This over party trended for 3 days straight. Then Sophia disappeared. For 72 hours, no one could reach her. Elena feared the worst. Then Sophia reappeared at a press conference, standing next to Julian, reading from a script. "My name is Sophia Reynolds," she said, her voice wooden. "I was coerced by Elena Vance to make false statements against Julian Thorne. She threatened me and my family. Julian Thorne is an innocent man being targeted by a vindictive wife and her criminal father." Elena watched the press conference on television, feeling her heart shatter. "She was my one witness," Elena whispered. "My inside source." Meredith put a hand on her shoulder. He got to her. He must have something on her, but Elena was not listening. She was watching Sophia's face on the screen, watching her eyes. Something was wrong. Sophia's eyes kept darting to the left, and she was blinking, a lot, irregularly, in a pattern. "Mary," Elena said slowly, Get me the raw footage of this press conference. Why? Because I think Sophia is trying to tell us something. The stress of the press conference, combined with the exhaustion of new motherhood, triggered a crisis. Elena collapsed in her apartment. Meredith called 911. At the hospital, complications developed. Elena hemorrhaged on the operating table. For 6 hours, her life hung by a thread while doctors fought to save her. She woke up to the worst news of her life. Mrs. Vance, a woman in a blazer, said, standing at the foot of her bed, "I am Dorothy Barnes from Child Protective Services. We have received a report regarding your fitness as a parent." Elena could barely speak. Her body was broken. Her spirit was not much better. "What report?" she managed. "Given the circumstances, your hospitalization, the pending mental health allegations, the viral video. We need to consider the child's safety." Dorothy Barnes's voice was professionally neutral. "We may need to place your son in temporary custody until the situation is resolved." "No," Elena said. She tried to sit up. Agony shot through her body. "No, you cannot take my son. He did this. Julian did this. Mrs. Vance, please remain calm. We are simply following procedure." Elena's father burst through the door, arguing with security guards. "That is my daughter," Robert shouted. "That is my grandson. You cannot do this." But they could, and they were. Elena watched through blurred vision as CPS began the paperwork to remove Leo from her custody. This was the darkest moment of her life. She had fought so hard. She had done everything right, and she was still losing. "They are taking my son," she whispered to no one. "After everything, they are taking my baby." Robert sat beside her bed, holding her hand. His face was a mask of barely controlled fury. "I can end this tonight," he said quietly. One phone call. Julian disappears. Elena looked at her father. She understood what he meant. "No," she said. "He is taking your son. And if we do that, if we become him, then Leo grows up knowing his mother had his father killed. That is not who I want to be. That is not who I want him to see. Then what do we do?" Elena closed her eyes. Even now, even at the bottom, her mind was working. "Play me the press conference again," she said. "Sophia's press conference. There is something I need to see." Robert pulled up the footage on his tablet. Elena watched through pain-blurred eyes. Sophia stood at the podium, reciting her scripted denunciation. Her voice was flat. Her posture was rigid. But her eyes were wrong. She kept looking to the left and blinking, not random blinks, a pattern. "Get Mary," Elena said. "Now." Meredith arrived 20 minutes later, still in pajamas. "What is it?" "Are you okay?" "Watch Sophia's eyes," Elena said. "Watch the blinking." Meredith watched the footage once, twice, 3 times. Her face changed. "Oh my God," Meredith breathed. "That is Morse code." They spent the next hour decoding the pattern, letter by letter. SARAHER3HEH. AASEMMA. Sarah. Camera 3. He has Emma. Elena's eyes widened. Emma is Sophia's younger sister. Julian kidnapped her. That is why Sophia recanted. He is holding Emma hostage. Meredith stared at the screen. "Sophia did not betray you. She is a prisoner. And Sarah," Elena said. "Sarah Mitchell, the bank teller who helped me. Sophia is telling us to check Camera 3 at the bank. There must be additional footage Sarah can access." Everything clicked into place. Elena sat up, despite the pain. Where would Julian keep Emma? Robert was already on his phone. "He has a yacht. The Sovereign, docked at a private marina in the Hamptons, registered under a shell company. I can have a team there in 2 hours. No, Elena said, not your team. We do this legally. We do this right. How? We cannot tell a judge we decoded Morse code from eye blinks. They will think we are crazy. Elena smiled despite everything. We do not mention the Morse code. Sophia filed a missing persons report for Emma 3 days ago. It is in the system. We give Detective Cross an anonymous tip about the yacht. Let the police connect the dots. Meredith grinned. That is devious. I love it. Elena looked at her father. I want this timed perfectly. Julian is planning a press conference tomorrow to announce he has been cleared of all charges. I want the rescue to happen live. I want the whole world to see his face when he realizes it is over. Robert nodded slowly. The student has become the master. Elena reached for her phone. One more thing. Call Sarah Mitchell. Tell her to preserve all footage from camera 3 at the bank. Everything. Tell her it is time. The next 18 hours were a blur of activity. Detective Angela Cross obtained a warrant based on the anonymous tip about Emma Reynolds' location. She coordinated with Coast Guard units and FBI agents who had been waiting for an excuse to move on Julian. Sarah Mitchell provided the bank footage from camera 3. It showed a clear, unobstructed angle of Julian kicking Elena. No ambiguity, no room for spin. Meredith filed emergency motions to halt the CPS proceedings, citing new evidence of Julian's criminal activity. And Elena, still recovering from surgery, still barely able to walk, prepared for the fight of her life. At 8 in the morning, she checked herself out of the hospital against medical advice. Robert tried to stop her. You are not strong enough for this. I have to be there, Elena said. When he falls, I need to be standing in front of him. I need him to see my face. She dressed carefully. A simple black dress. No jewelry, no makeup. Her armor was her presence, nothing more. At 9:30, Julian Thorne took the podium at the Plaza Hotel. Cameras flashed. Reporters crowded. The ballroom was packed with his supporters, his investors, his sycophants. Julian looked triumphant. He was about to announce complete vindication. I want to thank everyone for their support during this difficult time, he began. The allegations against me have been thoroughly investigated and found to be baseless. My wife is a troubled woman. I have only ever tried to help her. And as a loving father, I will be seeking full custody of my son. He paused for applause. He received it. He never saw what was coming. The screens behind Julian flickered. His PowerPoint presentation disappeared. In its place was a live video feed. Detective Angela Cross stood on a yacht, wind whipping her hair. Behind her, police officers were escorting a young woman down the gangway. Emma Reynolds, wrapped in a shock blanket, tears streaming down her face. This is Detective Angela Cross, NYPD Special Victims Unit, the detective said into the camera. We have just rescued Emma Reynolds, who was held captive on a yacht owned by Julian Thorne for the past 72 hours. Mr. Thorne is now wanted for kidnapping, false imprisonment, and witness tampering. The ballroom erupted. Julian's face went white. This is a setup. I do not know anything about this. The screens changed again. Now it was Sophia Reynolds, the real Sophia, standing with FBI agents. My name is Sophia Reynolds, she said, her voice clear and strong. 3 days ago, Julian Thorne kidnapped my sister Emma to force me to lie at a press conference. Everything I said was scripted by him under duress. I have recordings, I have text messages, I have documents. She looked directly into the camera, directly at Julian. Elena Vance told the truth. Every word. Julian Thorne is a monster. The screens flooded with evidence. Audio of Julian ordering the kidnapping. I want the sister grabbed, the little one. She does not leave that boat until Sophia reads my script. Video of Julian bragging to an associate. I own 3 judges in this city. You think I am worried about a court case? Financial records showing the Ponzi scheme. Money flowing from client accounts to Julian's personal yacht, his mistress's jewelry, his mother's mansion. Bank footage from camera 3. The kick, the fall, the blood, undeniable, unmistakable. Julian stood frozen at the podium, watching his empire crumble in real time. Then the ballroom doors opened. Elena Vance walked in. She was not in a wheelchair. She was standing, barely. Every step cost her, but she walked anyway. She moved through the crowd of reporters who parted like the Red Sea. Every camera turned to follow her. Every eye in the room watched as she approached the podium. She stopped directly in front of Julian. The room went absolutely silent. You told me I was nothing without you, Elena said. Julian's mouth opened and closed. Elena, sweetheart, this is all a misunderstanding. You said no one would believe me. You said I was crazy. You kicked me while I was carrying your child and stepped over my body like I was garbage on the floor. I never meant to hurt you. You took everything from me, Elena continued. My career, my friends, my money, my dignity. You tried to take my son. You told me I would be begging on the street. You threw $100 at my father and called him nothing. She stepped closer. Julian stepped back. But you forgot something, Julian. You forgot that I was a lawyer before I was your wife. You forgot that I graduated top of my class. You forgot that I used to destroy men, like you, in courtrooms for a living. Julian looked around desperately. His security guards were gone. His lawyers were backing away. His supporters were averting their eyes. I will give you whatever you want, he stammered. Money, the penthouse, anything. Just make this stop. Elena shook her head slowly. I do not want your money. I do not want your things. I want you to look at me. She waited until his eyes met hers. She saw the fear there, the recognition that his entire world had just ended. I want you to remember this moment, Elena said. The moment you realized that the woman you called nothing just ended your entire existence. And I did not need to cheat or bribe or hurt anyone to do it. I just told the truth, loudly, repeatedly, until the world had no choice but to listen. FBI agents moved through the crowd. Julian Thorne, an agent said, you are under arrest for kidnapping, false imprisonment, witness tampering, securities fraud, and assault. You have the right to remain silent? Do you know who I am? Julian screamed, his composure finally shattering. He tried to run, tripped over a camera cable, fell face first onto the polished floor, exactly the way he had made Elena fall. The agents cuffed him while he sobbed. I will destroy all of you, he wailed as they dragged him toward the exit. This is not over. This is not over. He passed Elena on his way out. She did not flinch. She did not gloat. She just watched. Meredith appeared at her side, grinning. So, about those documentary rights. I have had 3 producers call me in the last 4 minutes. Elena laughed. It was a real laugh, the first one in years. Let us talk numbers tomorrow. That is my girl, Meredith said. Outside the Plaza Hotel, in the cool night air, Detective Angela Cross found Elena sitting on a bench. Hell of a thing you did in there, Cross said. I could not have done it without you, Elena replied. You believed me when no one else would. Cross sat down beside her. I have seen 100 cases like yours, maybe more. You know how most of them end? Elena shook her head. They do not, Cross said. The woman gives up. The man's lawyers bury everything. Everyone moves on and pretends it never happened. She paused, looking at Elena with something like admiration. But you did not give up, even when you lost, even when everyone turned against you, even when they tried to take your baby. You kept going. I wanted to quit, Elena said quietly. every single day, but you did not. That is the part that matters, not the winning, the not stopping. Robert found them there a few minutes later. He was back in his flannel shirt, looking like a simple gardener again. "You did good, kiddo," he said, sitting beside his daughter. "Real good. I had help. You had tools. The decisions were yours. The courage was yours." He took her hand. "Your mother would be proud." Elena felt tears welling up. "You think so? I know so." She would be in there right now selling t-shirts. "My daughter destroyed a billionaire." "What did your daughter do today?" Elena laughed through her tears. Robert was quiet for a moment. Then he said something that made her cry harder. "I spent my whole career taking down monsters, Elena. Criminals, fraudsters, the worst people you can imagine. But I never did anything as brave as what you did tonight." "You built cages for them," Elena said. "I did, but you walked into the cage with one, and you walked out. That takes a different kind of strength." 1 year later, Elena walked into a sleek modern office in downtown Manhattan. The nameplate on the glass door read, "Vance and Collins Law Firm, specializing in domestic abuse and financial manipulation cases." The office was full of life. Paralegals working at their desks, phones ringing with new clients, a wall covered with thank you cards and photographs of smiling women and children, each one a case they had won, a life they had helped rebuild. Meredith met her at the door with coffee. "Morning, boss. Your 10 o'clock is here." She is in the conference room. What is her story? Meredith's expression sobered. Hedge fund manager husband. Controls all the money. Isolated her from friends and family. Sound familiar? Elena nodded. "Send her in." A nervous woman in her late 20s entered the conference room. She wore expensive clothes and perfect makeup, but her eyes were hollow with fear. She looked exactly like Elena had looked a year ago. "I do not know if anyone can help me," the woman said, her voice trembling. "He knows everyone. He has so much money. He says no one will believe me." Elena gestured to a chair. "Sit down. I am Elena. I know exactly what you are going through." The woman sat, but shook her head. "How could you possibly understand? You are a successful lawyer. You have your own firm. You are not trapped like I am." Elena pulled out her phone. She showed the woman a photograph. Elena on the floor of the First National Bank, blood spreading beneath her, terror in her eyes. "Because a year ago, that was me," Elena said, "and I am going to tell you something that I wish someone had told me." She leaned forward. "He is lying to you. People will believe you. You are not crazy. This is not your fault. And you can get out. It will not be easy. It will not be fast. But it is possible. And you will not be alone." The woman stared at the photograph. Her lower lip trembled. "I do not have any money," she whispered. "He controls everything. How am I supposed to hire a lawyer?" Elena smiled. "We have a fund for women in your situation, donated by someone who wanted to make sure money would never be a barrier to justice again." She paused. "Actually, it was donated by a former client's ex-husband. We liquidated his assets." The woman almost smiled. "That sounds like karma." "It was," Elena agreed. "Now, let us get started. Here is what you need to know. Document everything. Every text, every threat, every bruise, photos with timestamps, emails to yourself. Tell someone you trust, a friend, a family member, anyone. Do not believe him when he says no one will believe you. And remember this." She reached across the table and took the woman's hand. "Leaving is not giving up. Leaving is not weakness. Leaving is the first victory. Everything else is just collecting what you are owed." The woman began to cry. Not tears of despair this time, tears of relief. "Thank you," she said. "Do not thank me yet," Elena replied. "Thank me when we win." That evening, Elena drove north to upstate New York. Her cottage sat at the end of a long gravel driveway, surrounded by oak trees that blazed with autumn color. It was modest and beautiful. It was hers. She had bought it with her own money, from her own settlement, in her own name. The sun was setting as she pulled up, painting the sky in shades of gold and orange. Robert was in the garden, kneeling beside a small figure with chubby legs and wild dark hair. Leo, now 1 year old, was trying very hard to hold a tiny trowel. He kept dropping it and giggling. The secret to growing things, Robert was saying, is patience. You cannot rush it. You put the seed in the ground, you give it water, you give it sun, and you wait. Leo looked up at his grandfather with wide, curious eyes. And one day, Robert continued, it grows into something stronger than you ever imagined, Mama, Leo said, spotting Elena walking across the lawn. He dropped the trowel and toddled toward her on unsteady legs, arms outstretched. Elena scooped him up, holding him close. She breathed in the smell of grass and baby shampoo and home. You know something, little man? She whispered into his hair. You are going to grow up knowing that your mama fell down. Hard. And then she got back up. And then she made sure no one could push her down again. She kissed his forehead. And if anyone ever tries to tell you what you cannot do, what you cannot be, what you do not deserve, you remember your mama, and you tell them to go straight to hell. Leo giggled, not understanding the words, but feeling the love. Robert walked over, wiping dirt from his hands. Good day at the office? We signed 3 new clients, Elena said. All domestic abuse cases. All women who thought they had no options. Robert nodded, pride evident in his weathered face. You are doing important work, kiddo. We are doing important work, Elena corrected. I could not have done any of this without you. You could have, Robert said. You just would have done it slower. Elena laughed. She looked out at the sunset, at the peaceful land she now called home, at the father who had given her weapons and the son who had given her purpose. For years, she had believed Julian when he said she was nothing. She had believed that her worth was measured by his approval, his money, his willingness to keep her. She had been wrong. She was everything she had always been. She had just forgotten for a while. And now she spent her days helping other women remember too. 600 miles away, in a federal penitentiary, Julian Thorne sat alone in his cell. The room was 8 feet by 10, gray walls, flickering fluorescent light, a thin mattress on a metal frame. Nothing like the penthouse he had once owned. He had aged 20 years and 12 months. His hair was gray, his face was gaunt, his expensive suits had been replaced by an orange jumpsuit. A guard slid something under his cell door. Mail call, Thorne? Julian crawled off his bed and picked up the item with trembling hands. It was a magazine. Forbes. The cover showed a woman he recognized. Elena. His Elena. Except she was not his anymore. She never had been. She stood in front of a modern office building, surrounded by other women. All of them smiling, all of them free. The headline read, From Survivor to Savior. How Elena Vance built an empire from the ashes of her marriage. And beneath that, a quote from the article. He told me I was nothing. Turns out, I was nothing with him. Without him, I became everything. Julian stared at the cover for a long time. Then Julian Thorne, former billionaire, former master of the universe, former king of New York, curled up on his prison cot and began to cry. Not tears of remorse. Julian had never felt remorse for anything. Tears of pure, impotent rage. Tears of a man who had finally met someone he could not buy, could not threaten, could not break. He had kicked her when she was down, and she had gotten back up and destroyed his entire world. The fluorescent light flickered overhead. Somewhere, down the cell block, another prisoner was shouting about innocence. Julian did not hear any of it. He just lay there, clutching the magazine, weeping into his thin prison pillow. He would file 23 appeals over the next decade. All denied. He would write Elena 1,247 letters. She would burn every single one. He would spend the next 45 years in that cell, growing older and more broken with each passing season. And every year, on the anniversary of his arrest, a new Forbes magazine would arrive, always featuring Elena, always showing her success, her growth, her empire. A reminder. The first letter arrived on his first anniversary in prison. It was not from Elena. It was from Robert Vance. Inside was a photograph. Elena holding Leo in front of their cottage, both of them laughing. And on the back, in Robert's careful handwriting, were 4 words. She is still rising. Julian would receive that same letter every year for the rest of his life. Some people thought it was cruel. Elena called it justice. And somewhere in a cottage, in upstate New York, a little boy was learning to garden with his grandfather. Learning that some things take time to grow. Learning that patience is its own kind of power. Learning that the strongest trees are the ones that were bent by the wind but never broke. His mother had taught him that, and one day he would teach his own children the same. That is how legacies work. They grow from the seeds we plant in our darkest moments, and they bloom long after the storm has passed. The end. If you or someone you know is experiencing domestic abuse, help is available. National Domestic Violence Hotline, 1-800-79-97233. You are not alone, and it is never too late to get back up. If this intro already gave you chills, the full story will leave you breathless. Stay until the end. I promise you, the revenge is worth every second. And if you know someone who needs to hear this message today, someone fighting their own battle, someone who feels alone, share this story with them. Sometimes a single story can change everything. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a story like this one. Every video on this channel is designed to move you, inspire you, and remind you what you are capable of. Now, let us begin. Closing statement. Thank you for staying until the very end. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to bring you not just entertainment, but meaning, inspiration, and life lessons that stay with you long after the video ends. Every story we create is crafted with one purpose: to remind you of your own strength. If this story touched your heart, leave a comment telling us your favorite moment. Your words fuel our passion to create more content like this. Until next time, remember, you are never as powerless as they want you to believe. See you in the next story.